starts as a Bear. Took him to the NFC Championship game in 2010. Look at that throw. Was that catch made? It was by Jeffery. Now here's a guy, if he's healthy, look out.
Hello and welcome to another CSD Fantasy YouTube video. Today I will project Alshon Jeffery's fantasy points for 2017. After analyzing Jeffery and the Eagles' receiving and touchdown patterns, I will use a formula to project how many points Jeffery can expect to produce next year, depending on how many targets he'll see. I will also toss you some new numbers to adjust for Carson Wentz's completion percentage. So let's dig in.
Probably not the case tonight. They haven't sacked Cutler. He throws a touchdown. Alshon Jeffery with his first touchdown of the season.
To get a good solid base, let us start by looking at Jeffery's receiving patterns. First off, his target patterns. Using these will help us decipher where he is most productive compared to where he's used to seeing most of his targets. Having a good fit with the new QB in this category helps us out in the final projection. Jeffery sees a lot of deep targets. That is nothing unusual, but I think we all view Wentz as a short pass kind of guy, so I think it could be something that will drag down his stats a little bit. Next category is the yards per reception. Here is where we get a clear view of where he can produce fantasy points by racking up yards. Short over the middle and deep to the sides are his most productive zones. The final category is catch rate. This is extremely important when calculating the final fantasy projection. If we know how many targets he needs to catch one ball in a specific zone, our projection will be a lot more accurate than if we used the 58% average.
Now 2nd and 12 for Cutler. Fires right to Jeffery, and Alshon Jeffery twisted around for the first down.
Next off for Jeffery is his touchdown patterns. First off, let's look at his red zone production. He's not that efficient when it comes to passes thrown to the right down in the red zone, and he needs on average 4.6 targets per touchdown. Keep that 15% in mind later on because it will have an impact due to the Eagles' numbers in that zone. This is a little bit funny. His worst red zone area was the right side, while his best deep area is the right one. This will also come up later, so keep that 17% in mind. And all of these numbers will impact his final projection.
Here is Cutler climbing the pocket, swinging it to Jeffery, who leaps forward, and with the extension of the ball is very close.
Here's where a little secret comes into play. I will not just do a regular projection for Jeffery, since we have no idea if he'll be their wide receiver 1 or 2. So I've analyzed how the Eagles throw to both their wide receiver 1 and 2, and will provide projections for both scenarios. While looking at the wide receiver 1, we see that the short right is heavily favored, while the deep over the middle sees almost no targets. In the red zone, however, the left and the middle sees more targets, with the right taking a backseat. This is what I mentioned before. Jeffery's best red zone area was the right one, while the Eagles rarely throw to their wide receiver 1. This will impact his final projection in a negative way.
Cutler on 2nd down, backpedaling, now throws, end zone, Jeffery, a flag and a touchdown.
The targets for the wide receiver 2 is almost the opposite of the number 1 guy. Most targets go to the short left and the deeper zones are more evenly distributed. Here comes the really interesting stuff. And you will see a big impact of this in a moment. 50% of all red zone targets to the wide receiver 2 goes to the right. So even if Jeffery is considered wide receiver 2, this could bump up his scoring a ton. And seeing as the wide receiver 2 and 1 got the same amount of red zone targets last year, this could be big for Jeffery.
Cutler on the move, gets out of it, and heaves it deep in the area of Jeffery. Alshon Jeffery inside the 5 of the Lions.
For the fantasy projection, we need a measuring stick, and I'd like to start off with the yards. And to keep it going with less charts on charts, I will skip the touchdown projection chart and head straight into the total fantasy one after this one. It will summarize everything, so you're not missing out. You will just have one less chart to look at. But first, let's look at the projection for 110 targets. We see that there would not be that big of a difference if he was the wide receiver 1 or 2 when doing math. But when adjusting for Wentz's completion percentage and ignoring Jeffery's catching abilities, his yards as wide receiver 2 would be significantly lower. This is not that alarming, but it is good to have in mind. The Bears' quarterbacks from the last 4 years plays differently from Wentz, and that will have an impact, not just on the scheme, but when the difference is this big between the wide receiver 1 and 2 with the same amount of targets, it is safe to assume that this is the receiver's fault and not Wentz's, and we can focus on the purple and teal bars from now on. We see almost 100 yards increase for both bars when we increase the targets by 10 and get a range of yards that span from finishing wide receiver 32 to wide receiver 7 if you exclude touchdowns.
End zone throw. Catch. Did he hold on? Yes! Touchdown! Bears! Alshon Jeffery.
Here's a look at how Jeffrey's fantasy points most likely will look in 2017. As wide receiver 1, he would have a scoring span of 113.7 to 148.2 depending on the amount of targets. And with those scores, he would have finished between wide receiver 39 and wide receiver 10 in 2016. That is a pretty big span, but if we compare this with his projection if he was the wide receiver 2, we get a span from 108.3 points to 142, and that would have given him a finish in 2016 between wide receiver 42 and wide receiver 14, which is pretty amazing for a wide receiver 2. Seeing as he has a chance to finish that high, even if it's not treated as their wide receiver 1, I'm willing to draft him pretty high, not too high, but with a pretty good draft pick. I know that if he's not the number 1 guy, he won't get 140 targets, but I'll take 120 targets and 119.5 fantasy points. That is good to me. That is actually the DeAndre Hopkins numbers from last year. And I think I can get Jeffery a lot cheaper than what you got him. Let me know in the comments how much fantasy points you think Jeffery will score next year. And you think he will be worth more or less than what you're willing to pay for him? Thank you very much for watching. Please leave a thumbs up and subscribe. Everything is very much appreciated. You can check out Instagram and Twitter for more shorts and numbers with links in the bio. You can also go to csdfantasy.com for more fantasy numbers, such as Latavius Murray and the Vikings. And as always, the spreadsheets are dark and full of terror.